The cold doesn't just touch your skin, it invades your bones, it seeps into your thoughts, it changes the way you see the world. Have you ever imagined waking up in a place where winter isn't just a season, but a way of life? Welcome to Russia, a land where temperatures plunge so low that breath turns into visible clouds, where silence in the snow feels almost supernatural, and where survival itself has shaped traditions that outsiders rarely understand. But here's the unsettling truth. Behind the frozen landscapes and towering cities lies a cultural world that is as intense, mysterious, and unexpected as the climate itself. Because in Russia, the cold doesn't isolate people, it transforms them. Picture this: endless white horizons stretching beyond what your eyes can process, cities wrapped in ice, villages buried under snow, and yet life doesn't stop. It adapts, it evolves, it hardens. What kind of mindset does it take to not just survive, but thrive in such conditions? And more importantly, what kind of traditions are born from this relentless environment? You might expect hardship, you might expect struggle, but what if the reality is far more surprising? Because hidden beneath layers of snow and centuries of history are customs that feel almost paradoxical. Rituals that blend warmth and severity, connection and isolation, resilience and raw emotion. In Russia, stepping into someone's home is not just a casual visit, it's an unspoken contract of trust. Shoes come off, barriers come down, and suddenly, in a land known for its cold, you're surrounded by an unexpected intensity of hospitality. Why? Because when the outside world is unforgiving, the inside becomes sacred. And then there's the banya. At first glance, it sounds simple, a traditional steam bath, but in reality, it's something far deeper, almost ritualistic. Imagine entering a space filled with scorching heat, your skin burning, your senses overwhelmed, only to then step outside into freezing air or even roll in the snow. Pain and relief, heat and ice, extremes colliding. Why would anyone choose this? Because in Russia, extremes are not avoided. They are embraced, but this is only scratching the surface. There are unwritten rules, silent codes of behavior, emotional expressions that seem distant to outsiders but carry profound meaning within. Why do smiles come less freely in public? Why does silence often say more than words? Why is strength valued in ways that can feel almost intimidating? To understand Russia, you have to look beyond stereotypes, beyond headlines, beyond the cold itself, because the harsh climate didn't just shape the land, it shaped the people. It forged a culture where endurance is respected, where emotional depth runs beneath a calm exterior, and where traditions carry the weight of generations who learned to survive against all odds. But here's the question that changes everything. What if these traditions, these surprising, sometimes shocking ways of life, aren't just about surviving the cold, but about mastering it? And if that's true, what does it reveal about the true reality of living in Russia? What happens when survival is no longer a challenge, but an instinct? In Russia, you don't just learn how to endure the cold, you learn how to live with it, as if it were part of you. And that changes everything. Because the first shock isn't the temperature, it's the rhythm of life. Imagine stepping outside before sunrise, darkness still dominating the sky, the air so sharp it almost feels alive. People move quickly, deliberately, without hesitation. There's no wasted motion, no unnecessary interaction. Why? Because in a place where the environment is always testing you, efficiency becomes second nature. But then, something strange begins to emerge. Despite the harshness, despite the silence, there's an invisible thread connecting people, not through constant smiles or casual small talk, but through something deeper, shared endurance. In many parts of the world, friendliness is immediate, expressed through gestures, light conversations, easy laughter. But in Russia, trust is not given lightly. It is earned, and when it is, it's unbreakable. Have you ever experienced a connection so strong that words almost become irrelevant? That's the kind of bond forged here, because when people face the same relentless winters, the same challenges, the same isolation, something shifts. They begin to understand each other without explanation. And this is where things get even more unexpected. Celebrations. Yes, celebrations. You might think that a place defined by long, dark winters would feel heavy, even somber, but the opposite can be true. When Russians celebrate, they do it with intensity, tables filled beyond capacity, food that reflects history, survival, and pride. Conversations that grow louder, deeper, more emotional as the night unfolds. And then, the toasts. Not simple cheers, but speeches. Personal, reflective, sometimes philosophical. Moments where time seems to slow down, and every word carries weight. Why such depth in something as simple as a toast? Because in a life shaped by extremes, even joy is experienced intensely. But there's another layer, one that outsiders often misunderstand. Emotional expression in Russia doesn't always look the way you expect. On the surface, people may seem reserved, distant, even cold. But beneath that exterior, a storm of thought, loyalty, and feeling. Smiles are not automatic. They are meaningful, given only when they are real. So when someone smiles at you in Russia, it matters, more than you might realize. But this emotional depth also comes with a certain toughness, a resilience that can feel almost intimidating. Children grow up learning not just comfort, but strength, not just optimism, but realism. Because life has taught generations that conditions can change rapidly, and survival often depends on mental endurance as much as physical. And then there are the unspoken rules. Stand too close to a stranger, and you'll feel the tension. Speak too loudly in the wrong setting, and you'll sense the shift. There's a cultural awareness, a silent understanding of space, behavior, and respect. You're expected to observe before acting, to understand before judging. Because here's the truth. Russia doesn't reveal itself quickly. It doesn't open up easily. It tests you. It watches how you react, how you adapt, how you handle discomfort. And only then does it begin to show its true face. But this raises a deeper question. If everything, from relationships to celebrations to daily behavior, is shaped by endurance and intensity, what happens when those same values collide with the modern world? Is this way of life changing, or is it resisting change entirely? What happens when a culture built on endurance meets a world obsessed with comfort? At first glance, modern Russia might seem familiar. Bright city lights, luxury cars cutting through icy streets, trendy cafes filled with young people scrolling through their phones, music, fashion, technology. It's all there. It looks global. But don't be fooled, because beneath that modern surface, something ancient is still breathing, something unshaken. Step into a major city like Moscow or St. Petersburg, and you'll feel it immediately, a strange duality. On one side, cutting-edge modern life. On the other, echoes of a past that refuses to disappear. And the tension between these two worlds? It's palpable. Have you ever felt like a place is living in two different timelines at once? That's Russia, where glass skyscrapers rise above streets that have witnessed revolutions, where digital convenience coexists with traditions that demand patience, resilience, and emotional control. But here's where things take a darker turn. Because modernization didn't erase hardship, it simply changed its form. The pressure to succeed, to endure, to remain strong, it didn't vanish. If anything, it intensified. In a society where strength has always been respected, what happens when vulnerability enters the picture? Is it accepted or silently pushed aside? For many, the answer is complicated, because even as younger generations begin to embrace openness, self-expression, and change, there's still an invisible weight pressing down on them, an expectation to be tough, to handle things alone, to not complain. And this creates a quiet conflict, one that rarely gets spoken about. Outwardly, everything may look progressive, but internally, the old mindset lingers, and nowhere is this contrast more visible than in everyday interactions. Take relationships, for example. Friendships in Russia aren't casual, they're deep, loyal, intense, but they take time. You don't just click with someone overnight, you build it, layer by layer, through shared experiences, trust, and consistency. And once that bond is formed, it's powerful, almost unbreakable. But getting there requires patience. Now compare that to the fast-paced, instant connection culture spreading across the world. Swipe, match, move on. In Russia, that approach can feel hollow, even uncomfortable, because connection here isn't meant to be easy. It's meant to be real. And then there's authority, rules, systems, structure. In many countries, authority is questioned openly, challenged. But in Russia, the relationship with authority is far more complex. It's layered with history, experience, and a deep understanding that systems don't always function the way they appear to. So people adapt, they navigate, they learn how to move within the structure, without necessarily trusting it completely. And that creates a kind of awareness, almost like a sixth sense. You start to read between the lines, to understand what's said and what's not. But perhaps the most fascinating shift is happening quietly, almost invisibly. A new generation is emerging, connected to the world like never before, exposed to different values, ideas, and ways of living, and they're asking questions, challenging norms, reimagining what it means to live in Russia. But here's the tension. Can a culture built on resilience truly embrace vulnerability? Can traditions shaped by centuries of hardship adapt to a world that prioritizes comfort and expression? Or will the old ways hold stronger than anyone expects? Because right now, Russia stands at a crossroads, between past and future, between endurance and evolution. And what happens next might redefine everything. But there's one final piece of this puzzle that changes how you see it all. Because beyond the cities, beyond the modern life, there exists a side of Russia that most people never truly understand. A side that holds the deepest, most surprising traditions of all, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. So what is really happening in the hidden corners of this vast frozen land? Far from the glowing lights of the cities, beyond the polished image of modern Russia, there is another world, quieter, older, and in many ways, far more revealing. Have you ever wondered what life looks like where time seems to slow down? Where traditions are not remembered, but lived? This is the hidden Russia, a place where wooden houses stand against endless fields of snow, where roads disappear into forests that feel almost infinite, and where the silence isn't empty, it's alive. Here the cold feels different, not like an enemy, but like a constant companion. And the people, they move with a kind of calm certainty, as if they've accepted something the rest of the world is still trying to escape. Because in these remote regions, survival is no longer dramatic, it's routine, chopping wood before sunrise, heating homes by hand, preparing food not for convenience, but for necessity. Every action has purpose, every habit has history. And this is where the deepest traditions still breathe, not as performances for outsiders, but as essential parts of life. Take the concept of community. In cities, independence is often celebrated. But here, isolation can be dangerous. So people rely on each other in ways that feel almost forgotten in modern society. Neighbors aren't optional. They're essential. And trust isn't a preference. It's survival. Imagine knowing that in the harshest conditions, someone will come for you. No questions, no hesitation. That kind of bond changes how you see people, how you see yourself. And then, there are the rituals, simple yet powerful. Meals shared slowly, with intention. Stories passed down not through books, but through voices. Even the act of enduring winter itself becomes something almost symbolic, a test of patience, of strength, of identity. Because here's the truth, most outsiders never realize. In Russia, especially in its most remote corners, the cold is not just endured, it is respected, almost understood. And that understanding creates a mindset that is incredibly difficult to replicate anywhere else in the world. A mindset that doesn't panic in discomfort, that doesn't expect ease, that finds meaning not despite hardship, but within it. And suddenly, everything you thought you knew begins to shift. Because maybe the question isn't how people survive here. Maybe the question is, what have they discovered that the rest of the world is missing? In a life stripped of excess, distractions, constant noise, what remains? Clarity, resilience, a deeper connection to reality itself, or something even more unsettling? The realization that comfort might not be the ultimate goal after all. That struggle, in the right form, creates strength that convenience never could. So now think about this. If you were placed in this environment, this relentless cold, this intensity, this depth of tradition, would you adapt? Would you break? Or would you discover a version of yourself you've never met before? And more importantly, after seeing the reality of living in Russia, with all its harshness, its hidden warmth, and its surprising traditions, would you actually choose to experience it for yourself? Tell me in the comments, would you live this life, even for a short time? And if this journey opened your eyes in any way, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories that challenge everything you thought you knew.